The topic today is strive to assist individuals in their own evolutionary awakening process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shorten it down, and we're going to focus in on the evolutionary awakening process and what exactly does that mean, and how can we live from that understanding in our own lives. So I'm sure, evolution, I'm sure that you've all, read about it, learned about it in school because we studied the theory of evolution, Charles Darwin's theory that's taught in school, basically saying that we, humans, and all life on this planet has gotten where it is today from these little single cells by random acts of mutation. And then there's more to it, but that's the part I'm going to just stick with right now. So it's kind of this random process that has brought us to this point. Or we can listen to the Bible, for instance, as another source of wisdom, and it talks about creation. And in Genesis, it talks about how God created the earth and everything in it. And, well, he did it in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. And on the sixth day, man came to being. And it was his greatest creation. We're built in the image of God, is what the Bible says. Now, the problem is those two things don't really fit well together. You either have random acts of mutation on one side or divine guidance and a plan on the other side. And how do we get those to come about and mean the same thing if we ever can? Now, as Celeste mentioned, I'm a physicist by training, and now I'm stepping into ministerial school by training. And so, for me, I like having both sides of that in balance. I don't want to end up looking one way when I'm a physicist and looking the other way when I'm a minister. I like to be able to come from the same place, and I think we kind of do that when we learn what the evolutionary process means from science of mind. So Ernest Holmes, as Celeste mentioned, is the founder of religious science, and if you read his writings, he talks about the creative process all over the place. It's basically the one thing that he talks about very consistently in many, many different ways. I have a friend who says that Ernest Holmes is kind of wordy. He sort of is. But his point, I think the reason he uses so many words is so that he can come at the same thing from so many angles, so that if we don't get it one way, we kind of get it the next way. But he talks about the creative process from a place of where are we in our lives, and how can we create the divine, greatest, grandest idea of our life and have it appear? How do we do that? And so he talks about the law, and he talks about how the law responds to our thoughts and our beliefs and our intentions and our purpose and our feelings. All of this stuff that's inside of us, it just picks up and it creates our life from that. Now, if we get back to the evolutionary process, what exactly does that mean? Well, he doesn't talk a whole lot about it in that way. But there is a man named Thomas Troward who does talk about it a lot. And if you've taken Roots, he's one of the three guys in the Roots class that we talk about as being the fundamental people that Ernest Holmes got the science of mind philosophy from. Besides,
one woman.
Yes, Thomas Troward, Emerson, and Emma Curtis Hopkins. And Emma Curtis Hopkins is a wonderful mystic. She brought the mystical side to Ernest Holmes. But Thomas Troward was a judge. And he was born in India back in the 1800s. And he was born to two English parents, and they shipped him off to England to go to boarding school like they did in those days. So he really grew up in England, and he was a Christian because that's the path they were on there. And then when he finished his schooling all the way through his law degree, then he went back to India, and he started practicing law there, and he became a judge. And the thing about being a judge is, if you're going to be a good judge, you have to understand the people that you're, making decisions for. And so he went out and he studied Hinduism and Buddhism, which are the two main religions in India. So he had that, he had the Christian faith, and he had this very logical mind from being a lawyer. When he spent 20 years as a judge, went back to England, and he ended up kind of by chance falling into the New Thought movement there. Remember, New Thought is actually a philosophy that started in America, and then we've been kind of pushing it out. It's one of the great things that America has really brought to this world, I think. But he became enamored with the New Thought movement, got involved in it, and started speaking all over the place. And he wrote a lot of books. So, Ernest Holmes wrote a lot of books, Thomas Troward wrote a lot of books, and Ernest Holmes read Thomas Troward's books. And so Troward talks a lot about evolution, and one of the things that he says that there is an innate quality to spirit, that it wants to grow. It wants to become more complex all the time, that there's this push. We talk about it in Science of Mind as, that God is always spiraling upward. And so, that is a property, an innate property of spirit. And it also goes along well. Remember, I want to balance out physics and spirituality. It goes along well with that concept of what physics and our sciences is telling us, which is that the Big Bang happened like that, and then everything came into existence. How, why, I don't know. That gets a little bit farther back before time. It's hard to know what happened before time started. But so the Big Bang happens. In the first nanoseconds, it's all energy, and then it starts becoming matter, because energy and matter are the same thing. You end up with hydrogen, suns, galaxies. You have supernovas, which end up creating the material for planets. We end up with individual, single cell organisms on this planet. It grows and becomes us, right? That's the story that science tells. And from this perspective of what Troward is saying, that God is always an impulse forward and growing more complex, well, those two things seem to go pretty well together. But there's more to what Troward says. He says also that he talks very similarly to how Ernest Holmes talks about consciousness impressing itself on the law, the creative process, and that's what builds into our life. But just like Ernest Holmes will say, if you read him close enough, he will say that everything has consciousness. Rocks have consciousness. Humans have consciousness. Animals have consciousness. The difference between us is not the consciousness, it's how aware, how awake that consciousness is. All right, so the rock's pretty much asleep, right? And we have the opportunity to be very much awake and aware of where and who we are as the life that God is expressing right here, right now. Now, what happens, how does that work before you get to humans who are self-aware? Well, it's like the animal world. It's no different than the pets that we have. We have a lot of pets in America. You've probably either had one or been around somebody who has had a pet, whether it's a fish, a cat, a dog, a gerbil, a hamster, a bird, whatever it is. In our being with those animals, we know that they're creative in their own way. But Troward says the way that they create is they create out of the law of averages, because they're not aware of their consciousness, really. And they create out of that knowingness, that instinctual knowingness that's within them. And they create out of the life and the knowingness that they have, that they're aware of. And so they create like a dog if they're a dog, and they create like a cat if they're a cat. And people, if we're asleep at the wheel, create like a person, right? Just a person. We create out of the law of averages in our life, and we'll have a life that is built on precedent, built on the past, built on the things that people tell us. But we have a chance to evolve to something higher. We get a chance to evolve to a place where we actually know that we're creating, and even more important, we know that we can listen to Spirit through our intuition. And we can act on what Spirit is telling us rather than what our ego is thinking. And when we do that, when we act from that place of knowingness, then we get to live a life that is of our dreams. So, Celeste read a piece of the thing from Ernest Holmes where he talks about us revealing our consciousness. And he talks about that's the process that we go through. But I want to read a thing from Hafiz for just a second, because Hafiz is my favorite Sufi poet. He's just wonderful. And he's talking about what's it like if you're living from the law of averages. If you're just living from this place of moving through your life, he says, just sit there now. Don't do a thing. Just rest. For your separation from God is the hardest work in the world. It's the hardest work in the world. And that's true, because when we're listening to our ego and we're living our lives from that place, we're having to do all the work. And if we want to evolve and we want to have a life of our dreams and we're looking to move forward in new ways that have never been before, that's what evolution is about, is creating something new that has never been before. Then we listen to Spirit and we put that back into Spirit to create through the law. Now, I was thinking about that and I was going, well, if we're going to create in our lives, if we're going to try and create from a place of what we said our topic was today, strive to assist individuals in their own evolutionary awakening process. If I'm not going to just help myself, but help other people too, which is kind of what I hear out of that, then what does that look like? And the thing that I'm most aware of that's closest to that is what's called the Bodhisattva vow. Now, Bodhisattva are people out of the Buddhist religion who their intention is to become enlightened, not for themselves, but so that they can assist all sentient beings towards enlightenment. All sentient beings. So not just themselves, not just their family and friends, not even just humanity, but all sentient beings. They're going to stick around. Instead of going to nirvana, they're going to come back and be reincarnated into this world, into the cycle of suffering, in order to help everyone, everything become sentient in that same way. So I went looking around and I thought, well, Buddhist religion, who should I go to? Well, I love the Dalai Lama. I think you guys probably like him too. And so I went to a book by the Dalai Lama. It's called The Wisdom of Compassion, Stories of Remarkable Encounters and Timeless Insights. Another mouthful. But he says in that book, helping others does not mean we do this at our own expense. Buddhas and other enlightened beings are very wise. Throughout their lives, they want only one thing: to achieve ultimate happiness. How to do this? Be altruistic, cultivate compassion. So we kind of get to be, we kind of get our cake. We get to go to nirvana if we want to, and we get to help other people by being altruistic and cultivating compassion. So how does that look? How do we live from a place of compassion? Well, I don't know about you, but for me, it's not all that hard to live from compassion when everything in my life is just rolling along just really nice, right? Everybody's loving towards me, having a good time with my family and friends and work, and everything's just running nicely. It's a little harder when we get down and things are not happening quite so nicely. Family problems, work problems, elections, anyone? But what we can say is that, we have the ability to overcome that we don't have to live in that place. And I think actually that the Dalai Lama is a great example of how to do that. Now, the Dalai Lama is in his 70s now, and so who we see today is this man of great renown who goes around the world and goes to meetings where there's thousands of people show up and we all adore him. But that's not where he began. He began in his early years of 2, 3, somewhere around there, being found by the lamas and being pronounced the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama. So they took him away from his family for a while and took him back to the capital. His family ended up joining him after time, but in that time also, Tibet was an independent country, but China didn't see it that way. And by the time he was 15, China had invaded Tibet, and they had made him at 15, they had decided we can't have regents anymore, he's got to lead us. He's the person who is the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama. So at 15 years old, he picked up the mantle of actual responsibility for 6 million Tibetans. At age 23, with the Chinese knocking on his door, basically, he decided he had to leave and go into exile, and he's never been back to Tibet. And according to a Times article that I read, there was over 1,000 Tibetans that were killed in order to get him out of the country in the uprising that they had so that he could get out. So my heart goes out to the Tibetan people. But the thing that I pick up from the Dalai Lama is every time he's talked about the Chinese, every day, he says, I forgive them. I forgive them anew every day for their transgressions. But what he says in that same book, he says, and it's very important to make distinction between the actor and action. We have to oppose bad action, but that does not mean that we are against that person, the actor. Once the action has stopped, a different action comes. Then that person could be a friend. And I think that's what we have to take away in our lives. When we want to come from compassion, when we want to come from a place of evolution, when we want to come from a way of being that's going to change this world and create a world that works for everyone, no matter what's happening in our lives, whether it's a family problem, a work problem, somebody cuts us off on the freeway, or the elections. We have to remember to oppose the bad action, but don't hate the actor. We have to love the actor anyway. We have to forgive the actor for his transgressions, even though we're standing firm in our resolve on how we want our lives and our world and our country to be. Whenever I think of compassion and peace, I always go to another person who's one of my favorites, Mother Teresa, who just recently became Saint Teresa. Just a few weeks ago, she was canonized by the Catholic Church. And one of her most famous sayings is, "What can you do to promote world peace?" What can you do to promote world peace? And her response is, go home and love your family. Go home and be that person with the people that you come into contact with. Be that loving presence. My partner, my husband, and I have been together for 20 years. We've been married almost 8. Over that time, we've adopted 3 children out of foster care. John is 15 now. We saw him for the first time when he was 6. The older boys we adopted when they were 13 and 16, and my oldest son is now 30, almost. He'll be 30 in January. And I have a granddaughter who's going to be 4 this month. And it's that process. Go home and love your family. I think I've seen what we're talking about today in person. Through my family, through my boys, assisting them strive to assist individuals in their own evolutionary awakening process. I've seen that at work. I've seen how love is the answer. And so, what I would like to suggest for you is the same thing that Mother Teresa says. If you're going to do anything, if you're going to take anything out of this talk today, understand the impact that you have around you. And that all you have to do is go home and love your family. Go home and love the people around you. Go home and love the babies and the politicians. It's all one basket, isn't it? In the oneness that God is. And if we do that, then we will truly, truly be creating a world that works for everyone. Thank you. So I'd like to just go into some prayer. I just invite you to take a deep breath in with me and let it just go on out. And as I take that breath and go through that cycle, it allows me to drop down inside of myself to the place that knows that it knows that it knows, to the place that knows God as the source of my being, that place where there is no separation, where there is only oneness, that place that knows God as the Creator and also knows God as the source of everything in my life. And I know that life, that power, that presence that God is, that Spirit is. I know it as the love and the peace and the joy that moves through all of creation and the wholeness that God is to create not just my life, but all life. And I know it to be in harmony with the world. And I touch that place of harmony, knowing that we are the truth of it, that it expresses easily and effortlessly in our lives because it is the very source of all of creation. And I touch that life, and I know that it is good. And so it's from that place of knowingness that I speak my word today for my life, for your life, for the world and beyond, that this life that God is expressing fully and completely as our lives, that this life that God is love and peace and joy, knows no limitations. It knows no separation. It knows only the wholeness, the oneness that it is. And so I know and am confident and give voice to that knowingness, knowing absolutely that God is here right now, in and as and through us and the world and beyond. And for knowing that truth, I just give thanks. And I release this prayer into the law, knowing that it's already fulfilled in the mind that God is. And I say life and God are good and very good. And together we say, and so it is.